this class and the next one are particularly difficult conceptually because the works of art really challenge us as viewers to be active in how we look at pictures. They don't come at us front-loaded and easy to understand. And I think for many of us, this is why even 100 years after they were painted, these pictures still are incredibly challenging. And as I was saying to James, who isn't here now, but in class on Thursday, I was mentioning how when I was an undergrad, I really hated this stuff. You know, I thought modern painting was just like, you know, sort of a crazy farce. But I think it's just because I wasn't mature enough to handle it yet. And I was, you know, I was getting C's anyway in my art history classes, so you know, I didn't have it all together yet. And I kind of successfully avoided taking modern art as an undergrad because I didn't really like it. And I think it's, I have a friend who just wrote a book on women artists. She was here, gave a talk in February or January. But one of the things that she mentioned, I think is very true, is that there's an old adage that I know what I like. People say that about modern art. I know what I like and I don't like that, right? But the opposite is what's really true. It's not that we know what we like, it's that we like what we know. We like what we're comfortable with. We like being reassured. And this is why I think modern art is difficult for us, is because it presents to us a great unknown in a lot of different ways. And the more that we know about it, the more we are capable of liking it, because we start to understand what's going on. So just, you know, be prepared. The next couple of days are pretty challenging insofar as understanding or trying to understand where art is going in the 20th century. So we were talking about Picasso and Braque and this movement called Cubism, one of the first two movements in France in the 20th century, the other being Fauvism that we discussed last week Thursday, both of them branching away from the example set by Paul Cézanne, the late 19th century post-impressionist, who really focused on the structure of his canvases, separating color from description. And so for Matisse, it allowed him to push color even further. For Picasso and for Braque, it allowed them to think about the structure of the composition, where every possible part of it has structure, whether it's sky or water in Braque's harbor on the right, or the boat in the harbor, or the ground in the lower left corner. Or for Picasso, whether it's foreground, the human figure, which really disappears as he restructures it, or the background, each is structured similarly. And that's kind of a lesson that both of them got from Cézanne offered. When we looked at those pictures of still lives from Mont Saint-Victoire, where we saw the clouds and grass and mountain and field all really kind of look the same. So it's really all about structuring, looking at the world around you, but using that only as the most marginal of touchstones, where that becomes the inspiration for really, for the artist, the most important thing is producing something that works within that rectangular space. That the relationship between the painting and the world around it is not as important as the interrelationships within the painting, right? Composition is everything. And in fact, the two of them called this analytic cubism, because it really is all about analyzing the composition, deconstructing what they saw, finding relationships between the different visual parts, and then emphasizing those relationships as they put it back together on the canvas. Right? I just got a new camera, which is very nice. I got full frame camera. I was down at the National Gallery on Sunday, and I got some really nice pictures of this because I found it was pretty crappy before. But you can see as Picasso is now diving into the different areas, you see why it's called cubism, they're all very cubic looking, that not only is he reconstructing what he's seen to the point where it takes some work on your part to find the nude woman in here, right? And when we looked at the young ladies of Avignon, we saw how noses were often seen in profile where the face was seen from the front, and so I began to wonder if let's turn my pen on here, right? If we're not looking at things that might be noses here, the back of the head there, maybe a shoulder here or here. But again, the important thing to remember is that for Picasso, it's less important that it resembles what he saw, and it's more important that it works on this rectangular surface as a composition. And you'll notice as we look at the different sections that all of the color changes are also very much worked up with these sort of horizontal, slightly diagonal, some vertical patches of paint that come in and sort of tick together to build up the tone. It's really very heavily worked, right? It's not something he's doing quickly. And this is part of analytic cubism. Is this removal of color, so he focuses on structure, but also part of cubism is that lesson of Cezanne that we're talking about. The reason I talk about analytic cubism is that there are really two phases to cubism, and this is something that Picasso and Braque both said. Remember that the two of them are sharing a studio together beginning in 1908, 1909, and for the next 4 years are working sort of elbow to elbow in the studio. And Braque even said later that the great quote is that they were like mountain climbers scaling a cliff, that one would set the mark, the other one would then climb past him and go up and set the mark, and then they would climb past him, working like an inchworm up the side of the cliff, right? So what we see is Picasso taking a cue from Braque having taken a cue from Picasso, and really removing even more color from his composition. Braque had begun his career as a sign painter before he turned to fine art. In other words, he was working in the advertising world, so he was out there painting signs on the side of the street as a career, as a moneymaker, before he became successful as a painter. And what he realized that was a possibility of doing, and he's probably the one that innovated this, was the idea of stenciling letters onto the surface of the painting, because what he and Picasso had done with analytic cubism was to turn every part of the surface into a valid part of the composition. There are no solids versus voids. You know what I'm talking about there? There's no discernment, there's no distinction between the things that have mass and the things that are empty. Right? They are all treated the same way, and that makes the entire surface of the canvas into a flat surface. And Braque realizes that once we've gotten to the point where the surface of the canvas is being reasserted again, right, where you're aware of, instead of looking through a window, we've talked about this before, it says looking through a window to an extension of our space. We're looking at something, right? And that something that we're looking at is not representation, right? We're looking at the composition. And once Braque sort of that light goes off in his head, he says, well, what about stenciling? And you'll notice that there are these letters that are stenciled all over the surface, but none of them really spell anything out. They're snippets of words. Just like cubism is snippets of the visual experience, right? So when Picasso does the Nude Women, parts of it are seen from the front, parts are seen from the side, right? He's moving through space. He's incorporating the fourth dimension, time, into his work. You, the viewer, move. And it gives you that part of your experience, right? But everything is fragmentary. The views are fragmentary in cubism. And Braque takes that same issue and moves it toward the letters that we see on the surface. So in the upper right corner, there's this D ball, probably from a poster advertising a party. In fact, I just saw this. I was grading worksheets this weekend. I saw this French movie was on in the background, right, like Roku stick. And somebody was walking through this cafe, and there was a sign off that drawing the ball, right? Large party in French, and that's the D ball in the upper right corner. And the OCO, I had no idea, right? He doesn't want me to know. In the same way that Picasso maybe doesn't want me to really find a new woman. Even though the titles of these suggest that there is something that they're not entirely, it's not fully abstract. Right? There's something there to be seen. We're suggesting that. But what it is elusive and difficult. Right? We have a 0, 40 over here. Right? Probably part of the tab. It's hard to say. 0, 40 is probably 0 francs 40 centimes. When we say 40 cents, right, we used to see, nobody uses it anymore, but we would say 0.40, and in Europe they use commas instead of decimal points that way. Right? So he's giving us these snippets of experience, these snippets of things that we might have seen, and hoping, I think, that them, along with the other things that he does include, give us a sense of an experience that's experienced rather than just seen. That's lived rather than seen. Right? And that's the fragmentary nature. That's really what our memories are like. That's what our experiences are like. They're put together from fragments. We'd like to think that it's cohesive and unified and organized and organic, but really what it ends up is that they're impressionistic this way. I don't mean it's like the art movement. I mean it's picked up by looking here, looking there, and your brain pulling these all together. And that's, I think, the kind of experience that they're alluding to here, that your experience of a new woman would not be just a single view from a single viewpoint, but she moves and you move, and you incorporate that into the painting. For Braque, what he said inspired this picture was sitting in a cafe and looking out the window of the cafe at a harbor and seeing in the harbor a boat at dock and a man sitting on the nose of the boat playing a guitar, a Portuguese seaman playing a guitar. And so as you look at it, and you realize as you're starting to see that all of a sudden the fragmenting, and even coming back in with the sort of the white here, gives you the sense of the reflection. Because when you look at a window, right, you don't always see through it. You sometimes see things reflected on it as well, right? It has that play of allowing blocking and transparency at the same time. And since, like Picasso, the solids and the voids are all kind of the same, that means part of it might be in this wall, or part of it might be window, and you kind of blurring the things. And then you get these elements that justify. There's the sound hole and the string. But again, with the guy sitting there playing and incorporating time, it sort of flashes up and down. And you start to see it more than once. Right? The string's picking up over here. The idea of the boat more than the harbor. There's the most representational thing in the picture. Is up here, the rope wrapped around it in the upper right corner. Right? There's an element that's been suggested. Is this then meant to be the head or part of it up in here? Eyes, chin, maybe mustache, hard to say. And again, fragmented because it's not meant to be seen as a unified thing. It's been analyzed to the pulled apart and put back together. Still painted in the same way that Picasso is, because remember Picasso got that monochromatic brown from Braque's first forays, where he broke into that as Venus brown. Braque's been picking up on that, going to step further and saying, hey, what if we started to figure out other things, other ways of putting things on the surface that are different from the tradition. Right? Different from what painters have always been doing. And last week before, we were talking about how important it was ever since the realist movement. Right? Middle of the 19th century, the realist movement said, we need to be painting the modern world. So we get Manet, we get Millet, we get Courbet, we've already seen the workers, things that have never really been painted that way before. And as that century progressed, as we moved through the Impressionists and into the Post-Impressionists, what we started to see was artists saying, okay, if we're going to be painting the modern world, maybe they need a modern style. Why should we use traditional modes to paint the modern world? So they started turning to things outside of the Western tradition. They started turning to Japanese print, for example, right? Or they started turning to Gauguin, started looking into Tahiti for something different, something to break through from this, so that they can make art that reflects the modern experience. much, the modern trend is so different from traditional, that they shouldn't use traditional art styles to do this. So Picasso and Braque are really another step in that same direction of trying to come up with something that people hadn't tried before in order to make an art that is really particularly modern. And for Braque, it's this amazing sort of moment where he says, hey, stenciling. Let's reassert the surface of the canvas again. And it helps as much as anything to tell you to not think about paintings in the traditional way, which is an extension of your space. What the painting is an extension of your experience. It's very different, right? It's not unified with the space around you. Is that coming too clear? Like I said, this is a tough series of sort of classes, right? Modern art for a modern age. And questioning the traditions of art that said, ever since the Renaissance, with perspective, that you can create, Renaissance art always said, you can create a three-dimensional thing on a two-dimensional surface. And then you think more about the thing than you think about the surface. And for Picasso and Braque, we're now thinking almost entirely about the surface of the picture. Braque's use of stencil then led into the next logical step, which is collage. And it was really Picasso and Braque that, if anybody can claim to have invented collage, it's probably Picasso and Braque. They're doing it as early as anybody, right? And it comes directly out of this interest in stencils. So what Braque does is, okay, if I'm going to stencil letters right over the top of the painting anyway, why don't I just lay other things on top of the painting too, and then maybe draw over the top of that? So in this case, the title is from the words that are here. There's the signature as well. He's got 3 or 4 kinds of paper that have been glued together on top of each other. Simple collage, right? That's what the term means. There's some black paper. You've got a piece of stick-em wallpaper, right? And you can see that it's already been pinned up there. There's a pinhole in it still. But grained paper to look like wood, the kind of things you would put not up on the wall so much, as probably inside of a drawer when you're putting plates in there, right, that you could pull out later and throw away. But he cuts it up and lays it down here, and then he draws over the top of it this motif again of the guitar. He loves the motif of the guitar. He and Picasso adore it for a couple of different reasons. One, it's got this beautiful shape, right? And now I sound like some sort of 60s sexist or nothing. But it's the refinement of that board along the side, right, and the edges of it, and the idea of a hollow object with solid parts to it, right? But also the idea that art and music go hand in hand. And that's something we kind of talked about here and there. The relationship between art and the other art. Think back to Titian, that wonderful painting of the musicians in the countryside, the pastoral concert, right? It's a theme that runs through art. We haven't seen that many of them, but we probably should see more. And so art, you can see how much he's enamored with the sort of the bent wood of the side of the guitar and the shape. And as he's putting it together here, you'll notice he's not really attempting to get the guitar hole where it belongs, or even really the right number of strings everywhere, 4 down below and 5 up above, neither of which is really correct, right, unless it's a bass guitar. And no neck whatsoever, because what he's interested in is the composition here. He's not interested in replicating with any precision what he had actually seen in the first place. Here's a close-up so you can see the degree to which this has all been sort of glued together, working on the edges. It looks as if I need to look at this more closely or read something more about it, because I was amazed when I got in on this. The degree to which it looks as if the white paper's been cut in order to facilitate that piece of wood grain paper that's been laid in here, right? But other things, right? We have papers that have been glued down, but then the thing on the composition, which is a paper, the sheet music, right? The aria de Bach is actually drawn. So again, he's playing with what is what. How do we represent in this world? And using wood grain paper over the top of a wood guitar, right, is again playing with this idea of representation. It's really very challenging as a work of art. Now, Braque even said that he liked Bach because the names sounded the same. Right? My name sounds like his. It's Bach with an R. Right? Braque and Bach. And he did a number of images with Bach's name in them. Because music was seen in the early 20th century. Music was seen as pure form, pure composition. It didn't have narrative. It didn't represent, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is how it was viewed, as being truly sort of art for art's sake, right? It was just beautiful. And it didn't try to be anything else but composition. That was how people saw music. And so incorporating musical elements into art suggests that art can be the same thing. Representational art can also be purely composition, without all of the baggage that the Western tradition had brought to art. Right? So, collage comes out of, for Braque, comes directly out of the idea of stenciling, right? Led into the idea of collage. And of course, because he's sharing his idea with Picasso, great idea, right? I'm going to do it too. And so, these, up until about a week or two ago, were hanging next to each other in the National Gallery. Their works on paper, so they can't stay out in the light for too long because they fade. So they're only out intermittently. But again, Picasso's working with the idea of collage, and this was originally just pinned to the surface. The conservators have tacked it down, but they've left the edges up so you can see pretty clearly that he means it as a quasi-three-dimensional work, right? That we're supposed to see the shadow underneath the sides of these things, some of which is there, some of which is drawn. And he, too, is picking up on this idea of collaging different elements together to add to the experience. So Braque gives us wood-grained stippum paper to evoke the wood of the guitar. Picasso gives us all sorts of other papers that suggest the table where the cup of coffee is. So we've got our cup of coffee, and it's handled through collage, right? Different layers of collage, where he's picked up some brown paper for coffee, drawn on the top of it to complete the idea of the top of the cup, but we see the top at the same time that we see the side, right? Multiple points of view all at once. We see the saucer down below, but his cutout is not even really making the attempt to make it look like the saucer, but it evokes it well enough. And this is, as you can see from the drawing down below, this is sitting on a table with a fringed tablecloth that hangs down, and even we can see part of the leg of the table down below. But again, we see the coffee cup from the side, right? The mouth of the coffee cup from the top, and we see the table from the top, but then we see the leg from the side. So again, it's the same incorporation of you moving as you look that Picasso brings to the work. And then he adds these other things, right? This that is, it's not paper, but is in fact a piece of tablecloth that he's cut out and glued here. So he's again evoking the experience. Rather than draw the tablecloth and the pattern on the tablecloth that covered it where the cup of coffee was sitting, he simply tacks a piece of tablecloth on there, right? But not covering everything because he's, again, it's a snippet, it's a fragment. It's meant to evoke an experience rather than visually describe it in the way you might actually see it anywhere else but a painting. Okay. Upper left corner, we also have a bit of drapery from a window hanging over the side. And again, these are all meant to bring in parts of the experience of having a cup of coffee, sitting at a cafe table. And then you'll notice that superimposed over the top of all of that is another guitar. Do you see it? Right? You can see the edge of it on the right. You can see the hole in the gray piece of paper. But only slightly evoked, because again, cafes and music, right? Giving you elements that bring out the idea of the experience of the cup of coffee rather than illustrating it. And so this is really very different from analytical cubism, isn't it? Where they're painting everything, where they're fragmenting the forms and putting them back together into a composition. What we're doing here in this second phase of cubism is we're taking different elements and bringing them together, right? Rather than taking what we see and ripping it apart. And Picasso and Braque realized that this, while it's still Cubism, is a different approach. And so they call this second phase synthetic Cubism. Right? More or less begins with Braque's stencils that leads them to abandon this painting of the cubes. Still shares stuff with it, the idea of looking at things from multiple points of view, time elapsing, evoking experiences rather than describing appearances, but synthesizing different elements. That's the way to tell it apart, right? Analysis is to break it down and try to understand. That's the early stuff, the Cubist stuff. Synthesis is to bring together, right? And that's what these collages do, is to bring together these different elements to give us, again, an evocation of an experience, but in a similar but different way. Right? So here are two early modern art movements that we talked about. Fauvism last week, Thursday, and now Cubism in two sort of phases on Thursday and today. Why don't I have the name of this up? Well, anyway, Germany, Kirchner, that should probably Ludwig. Right, these are the clues where we've moved to. We're going to look at a few other countries, come back to France, but we're going to spend some time in Germany talking about what's going on during this exact same time period as both Fauvism and Cubism in France. And in German art, we see a very different. What's coming up next? Let me see where I am on the slideshow. And if I can, okay, very good. A very different approach to art. The cubes of Picasso are gone. You might think that some of the color schemes remind you of Matisse and Fauvism. They're very hot and striking, disjointed and disassociated from observed reality, certainly even more so here, but also incredibly jarring, right? Incredibly disconcerting, right? It's also darker. It seems more sinister in a way. The tones are darker, and it's certainly much more representational than what we're looking at with Cubism. These works are intended to be social critiques. They are meant to be criticisms of modern society. As we look at these people crowded on the street, so can you read the picture? There's a streetcar in the back. It's red. Right? You can see the light inside the streetcar, and it's just gone by on the rails. Right? You can see the rails in the pink foreground here. And it's a major shopping street in Europe, and the streetcar ding, 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 ding comes up the street, and people part to let it by, and then they kind of come in behind it. Right? And you can still see this too today in places that have streetcars and a lot of pedestrian traffic. We now have the streetcar in D.C. There's not a lot of pedestrian traffic on H. Right? But you can go places that have them. You see this exactly happen. They push it out to the side as they're milling up and down the street on either side. And you can see the crowd of people on either side that have parted to allow the streetcar to go. So the little girl that's come out with her little whirligig, right, her little pinwheel, and an amazing hat. Right? But as we look at the people, we realize that they're all incredibly ugly and kind of on purpose. That he's rendering them not as particularly attractive people. And you'll notice with this detail on the right that that fellow with the green face is leering at the woman in yellow, right? She just walked by and he turned around to look at her butt, right, as she's passing him. So he's, this creepy guy in public looking. Now, this is complicated by the fact that by their dress and by Kirchner's own writings, we can identify the fact that these women, the two prominent ones that you see here on the right, are prostitutes. So he's looking at them partly because they want him to. And the guy on the far right, right on the edge, seems to be sort of looking back over his shoulder. Everybody's paying attention to them. And this is, I think, intended, Kirchner wrote about this, this is intended as a critique of how amoral modern society is. Right? Despite our fancy clothes, society is very amoral. And the way he paints looks almost as if he never took a painting lesson in his life. James, I'm going to pick on you again. Matisse starts to look pretty wonderful by comparison, you know? Even though the colors are similar, look at those faces. They look like horror movie masks, you know? Halloween masks by comparison. He's not making any attempt to even model them. Like something of a zombie picture, right? The woman in yellow with the black or slightly dark blue around her lips, right? And things that look as if they're gashes and cuts and all those opposites on the color wheel, greens and oranges placed immediately next to each other that really vibrate. And I've always found Kürtner just so hard to look at. This is a huge picture, too. It's about 5 feet across. It's really big. And I just always found him sort of, I like what he's doing and I like the ideas he's trafficking in, but the painting itself, I think he wants it to be ugly, and that's, for me, kind of problematic. Because I do kind of want my art to be something I want to look at more often. And Kürtner, I don't. So he comes up in these because he's an important idea guy. Now, this movement that Kürtner's part of that we really talk about here is called Expressionism, because he really is focusing on something that we saw born in post-Impressionism, which was an interest in artists trying to find individual expressive qualities, something that we saw with, for example, Van Gogh or Toulouse-Lautrec. And really, in many ways, Kürtner's works, and I wish I had Van Gogh and Toulouse-Lautrec right here. Swath's a good word. It's a joke. But if I had Toulouse-Lautrec to put up alongside this, you'd see how this is kind of a logical extension of that. Colors dissociated from description, colors used for other purposes, in this case, trying to emphasize personal expression. And even the rendering does that because there's no attempt to use the rendering in the classical traditional way, in the way you might have learned in art schools. It almost seems more like children's art, or the art of the insane, as if he'd been untrained. And that's something that Kürtner is actually aiming toward. He actually trained as an architect and moved into painting from there. So he did know how to render tightly. He's breaking free from that and moving in a new direction. So the colors that he chooses are just, like I say, impossible, really hard to look at. It's not migraines in the making, you know? Pinks with shots of green making up the ground here. Gauguin had done something very similar. He gave us red ground on his landscapes. Kürtner's buying into that as well with this particular form of expressionism, right? So I didn't mean that. As you think about his form of expressiveness, if you look at the hat of the prostitute in the foreground, you'll notice that parts of it, like right in here, this bit right here, my red's not even showing up, is it? He's taken the tube of paint, and he's just squeezing it onto the surface. Can you see that? Right? Right in here, these snake-like elements are just, not even taking the palette knife, you're not using the brush anymore. You're just taking the paint and squeezing it out onto the surface of the panel, or the canvas at various spots, right? Again, rejecting the idea of skill. He's trying to make it look as if he's the most unskilled painter in the world. And if we look at other things, the corners like Girl's hat, and the way that he's really just messing the paint together to the point where it almost becomes muddy. This is something that he's working with in his works, right? So trying to make it look as rough and untrained as possible, right? And all of this harshness, here's a Kürtner from the National Gallery, about 6 feet tall, right? Two prostitutes, this would be called two nudes for the decorum of our taxpayers, right? Their hair melding into one seen from the back, one from the front, but you can see the same interest in jarring color juxtapositions. This was all intended as social criticism. That what he's trying to show is that the modern world, for all of its glamour, for all of its glitz, for all of its progress, is still rough and savage at its core. And this for him was a very important concept. He wrote about it. He wrote a manifesto. And he wanted art to show the savagery that lay beneath the surface of modern society. Here's a nice detail of the thigh, the left thigh of the nude with her back to us. So you can see that even here, it looks like he's using the palette knife, scraping into it, and simply in parts where he could put the paint on again, sort of just putting it on from the tube directly onto the canvas. But again, making it look as if it's utterly savage. Now, what's his point here? The point is, like I said, to reveal the fact that we haven't really progressed as far as we'd like to think we have. Right? That's the social comment. That we still have some progress waiting for us. Right? And he wants to reveal the fact that we haven't made as much progress as we think that we have. And it's this basic idea that art can reveal where we came from, or maybe where we haven't come from yet, led Kürtner to name his particular brand of expressionism to call it Die Brücke, which in German means the bridge. Art forms a bridge between where we are now and the past from which we came. Art can then reveal that to us, right? Can form that bridge. And the point of that is, and this is where it still has a social agenda. It's not just going out there and sticking its finger in the eye of society, right? What Kürtner said was that unless we understand where we came from, right? Unless we understand the status path that we've all evolved, if we don't understand that, we'll never continue to evolve. We'll never make progress from where we are to the next step. So what we need to do, he said, was to form a bridge between the now and the past, so that we can build a bridge from the now to the future. So if you look at things, he said, what it will tell you is where we came from, so that we can get to the point where we can leave this behind and move forward. So he's not showing us a utopia, right? He's showing us a dystopia, the opposite of a utopia. With the idea that if we understand our wonderful world as being rife with faults, we can then take the proper steps to move forward. Now, all of this came out of prominent philosophical writings around the year 1900 that were very popular in Germany and are really some of the most important philosophical writings of the 20th century. This comes right out of the writings of Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said that our evolutionary process isn't over yet. And for us to think that it is stupid. That we have evolved from apes, but we will also then evolve into a new race after this, a race of supermen. Right? This is the core of Nietzsche's beliefs, right? This is, if you ever saw 2001: Space Odyssey, that's exactly what's going on. You start with the monkeys, you get to space travel, you get to the super evolved space alien coming back from the sky. So it's probably lost on most of you, but it's still great. So Kubrick, go see it. Right? It's also the basis of a lot of fascism in the 20th century. Hitler loved Nietzsche, loved this idea that he can help arrange a super race, right? Get us to that next step. Kürtner's way ahead of that, right? He's not a fascist. He's not a Nazi. They're not even around yet. But he is interested in this idea that we've got progress ahead of us. And in order to make progress, we need to understand that the process isn't over yet, right? And part of that is understanding the process that got us to where we were. So he's making a consciously savage art, right? Depicting high society in a savage manner. In order, he hopes for us to recognize that we shouldn't be content, that we shouldn't rest, that there is progress yet ahead. The bridge to the past helps us, knowing there's a bridge to the past helps us to build a bridge to the future. Thus, Die Brücke, the bridge. One thing that's important to bring up here is how many times in the last month of class we've seen artists making very forward artistic proclamations, right? Works of art that are meant to sort of like be a splash, make a statement. How many times have you seen this done with the subject matter of prostitution? Right? Whether it's Manet or Picasso or Kirchner. These artists are using prostitutes as a theme to enlighten us to who we really are. Part of it comes out of the realist movement. As I said, show parts of society that have never been shown before. Manet's probably getting us there, although Titian did it as well. But people kind of turned a blind eye to that. For Kirchner, prostitutes is rather very specific, right? Sex is beneath the clothing. Our primal nature is beneath the clothing, right? So these two women at the back that you see, the two nudes at the right, are what's beneath the surface of the women on the street with all of their fine clothing. That's our primal nature, right? But certainly for all these artists, this is, the visibility of prostitutes is very much a part of the modern world, or at least was at the time. And the issues that surround that were in many people's minds. So it became, for artists, a theme to which they returned again and again, to comment on what the modern world is all about and how painting relates to that. Another German expressionist, but very, very different from Kirchner, is Vasily Kandinsky, who again is these artists that I didn't like when I was an undergrad, but I really like Kandinsky now. So another variation on expressionism. Again, using nature as the springboard, but not really trying to replicate nature, at least not in the same way that you see it. Now, the picture in the film, can you read the picture? Can you make it out what it is? I mean, the title doesn't tell us much, Autumn number 2. But can you tell what we're looking at? Victoria? Yeah, definitely. And so the reflection, what is the reflection that it suggests? By water, right? So, yeah, and this sort of has the top on it like a tower, maybe, perhaps, right? Again, he's not going to put it together so clearly for us. It could be mountains as well. But you get the sense that here's the edge of the water, right? And then everything down here is reflecting, right, what we see up above. But at the same time, when he starts to put it back together again, right, that just becomes the basis for an exploration of colors. And he's not doing the same thing Kirchner is. Kirchner is in Dresden. And this is in Munich. Not that really matters. It's just important to realize that different artists in different cities might start to do things in a rather independent way from each other, right? Still expressive, using the colors for expressive means rather than for descriptive means, but not necessarily doing the same thing Kirchner's doing in trying to reveal the savagery beneath the veneer. He's in fact trying to do exactly the opposite of that, as we'll discover. What he ends up doing is, as he looks at nature and looks at the world around him, he takes what he sees and he uses it for an exploration in the canvas of the interrelationship of shapes and lines and colors. This is exactly what he's most interested in, is those interrelationships, regardless of what he's trying to illustrate. I don't think he's trying to illustrate it anymore. He's simply working out these dynamic interrelationships. So as he paints, he's interested here in the play of the orange versus the blue, the line formed by the shrubbery on the side of the water, but that becomes a squiggly line that intersects with some brown. And he's really more interested in the play of forms and colors, shapes and lines, all of which he thinks have independent expressive value. He wrote about this. We're not just guessing, right? All of these artists really were very, very clear about what they were trying to do. More than almost any other artist we've looked at and will look at he pushes us toward total abstraction. Now, he's still pretty representational here, but many people talk about Kandinsky as the father of abstract art, one of the first to really stop trying to make representational paintings at all. Right? Something Picasso never really did. The father of abstraction. And like I said, he wrote about it. We have a copy of his manifesto in German. You can still buy it for like $5 in English, right? Concerning the spiritual in art. His idea was that if we look at nature and we see, instead of things, if we see colors and shapes and lines, each of those has a spiritual value that affects our psyche. And he means spiritual in the broadest, loosest sense. Spiritual as in something that's not physical. Right? Something that's metaphysical, above the physical world. And that our emotions are part of this. Right? These are things that have nothing really to do with the physical world. Right? Our feelings. So for him, as he lays out here, color, shape, lines all have spiritual values. And each of them, he writes in the book, can be related to music. In fact, Kandinsky suffers from a symptom where he can actually hear color. What's it called? Synesthesia. Right? Where and it's a very rare symptom, but where your senses get mixed up and people can actually taste color or hear color. And Kandinsky hear color, like you would actually hear tone when you look at blue, hear tone when you look at red. Right? And he wrote about what those tones were and related music to art. Right? Because he saw it as having these metaphysical values that he could hear inside his head. Right? That weren't in the physical world themselves, but were outside of that. So caused by that experience. Right? So he goes through and he sort of documents what is orange. What are the tones associated? What about red? What about red in conjunction with yellow? And certain tones together work like different musical instruments. But all of this is independent from the things that carry the color. Right? So the color green, my shirt, green. That green color carries value and content independent from the fact that it's a shirt. And that his job is then to figure out what that value is and have to separate it from description to get the value of the color. And so what he ends up doing, starting around 1909 and moving through 1913, is to take a series of steps where he uses art to become increasingly non-representational, increasingly abstract, so that the shapes, the lines, and the colors will carry all of the importance. Will carry all of the will carry everything for you to understand that has nothing to do with whether or not it's a house by a river with shrubbery or a castle tower. I kind of think that's probably more likely a castle tower because one of the things we know when we look at his work and he's working his way toward abstraction is he loves medieval metaphors. Because medieval art for him was an art that did, in fact, embrace its spiritual content. It was art meant for devotion. So he loved knights on horseback, for example. Images of St. George killing the dragon is one of the stays, right? And you'll see old churches popping up. You'll see towers popping up as well. So the tower that we see here, while it's been abstracted, might be the tower of a castle, it could be the tower of a church as well. On the right, that form in the middle that's almost impossible to read. If I say a man on horseback, can you begin to see it? Right? The legs at the bottom, that arc at the bottom becoming the legs. The thing on the right over here functioning almost like the neck of a horse with some, again, all being very abstract. It's some decorative element on the top. a figure on the back here. But again, moving away from strict representation. These are motifs that we see throughout his paintings. They show up again and again and again. So if we look at this picture on the left, right, we're going to talk about how did Kandinsky get to abstraction. We start to see that he's been looking at things, so he's not necessarily setting up an easel outside and painting what he sees. What he's doing is he's amalgamating different forms together and painting them in non-representational colors, colors that don't represent. You can pick out a great number of things here, can't you? Even if it's simplified, right? 4 men standing in the lower left corner. You can see that. A guy coming out of an egg with his arm raised up. Lower left corner. Lower right corner. Somebody looks like they're rising up out of bed. With a orange baseball hat. A man on horseback in the middle. Charging forward. The guy with the north side. See him? That's Christ on the cross. More tower-like forms. Up in here. Or there. And even though we have this man on horseback here, another one in front of him here, more figures moving through the landscape here. There's also this large thing in the middle, which might also look like a horse's head and neck, or a giraffe. But knowing that he likes these medieval metaphors, that's probably what that is. So pulling together a bunch of symbolic forms for it, right? The sky up above, almost like it's above, around it. And pulling together all these symbolic forms of resurrection, motifs, chanting, walking through the landscape. Figures triumphant, emerging from an opening in the earth. He's putting together and he's using them to focus your mind not on a particular, not on a particular narrative, but rather to get it into a particular theme, which is this theme of spiritual motifs. That's been enhanced by the colors that he paints them in, which are not intended to be representational. Right? Now, the fact that he loves these metaphors of charging soldiers on horseback that appear again and again in his work, this led him to use the theme for the name of his particular brand of expression, which he calls the Blue Rider. And there was a group of artists that assembled around Kandinsky that called themselves this, and they in fact exhibited together under that title, the Blue Rider Group. And the writer for him, the word Reiter in German, actually also means knight, right? The blue knight. So you go back to this idea of, and this is I think an important thing. Not only does this evoke the Middle Ages, a period when art and spirituality did go hand in hand, but it also evokes the idea of battle, into a fight, a struggle. And this is important in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, his art is struggling against tradition, trying to fight against the weight of European life. Find something different about art. Fight against America. On the other hand, it's also a fight for spirituality. And think about the evil knights, right? Okay. In these days, 100 years after this, in retrospect, we look back at the Crusades, they constituted, right? But the Crusades were, from the mindset of a Crusader, a fight for spiritual truth. Right? Now we think, okay, it's all about pressure. But for Kandinsky, that I think is part of the theme, is this idea of fighting for spiritual truth. And this is why he calls them in the Blue Rider, this is why he uses horse theme on the cover of his manifesto that explains how art can become spiritual. So for him, this is a really important metaphor, the idea of the night. Now, as he moves through his works, you can see that he pushes it. He just keeps pushing it. And as we look at these two side by side, and notice, by the way, that the titles have become increasingly non-descriptive. And they're musical titles, improvisation, composition. These are musical titles, right? But you'll notice, if you look at this, that there are some things that continue here. The basic composition of this, right, that guy there is right here. Right? And the neck of the horse is still there. Right? This tower is still here. Right? These towers of churches in the background on the right, reduced to a single church on the top of the hill. But he's increasingly abstracted it, right? And turned it into something where those spiritual symbols that he's using early on become nothing more than colors and shapes and lines. Right? This is what he's been fighting against. This is what he's been fighting for, I should say, is to move art in this direction. Now, in this particular case, we see another work, and I wanted to talk a little bit about his belief structure, what's pushing him in this direction. Kandinsky belonged to a sort of modern philosophical movement called theosophy. And there were a couple of basic tenets of theosophy. There's more than just a couple, but a couple that are important for Kandinsky. Theosophists believe that all world religions were basically different groups trying to give expression to the same idea. That there was more similarity than there was difference. That there was, in the spiritual realm, in the metaphysical realm, there are feelings of who we really are friends people. That we're trying to get some sense of truth. Some sense of our relationship with the world, the environment, the atmosphere, the universe. And that each religion is a different attempt to give voice. That's the idea. It's all one thing. Right? There's this unity in the universe. That the different religions tended to obscure. Because you think about experts in the world. In the way when we're really supposed to be reading. Right? And in the same breath as that, in the same theme as that there is unity everywhere. They also believe that there really is universal harmony to be found out there. But the problem is, the opposite, that we're too caught up in looking at the world around us. And if we stop paying attention to the physical world, we can get it. We can figure out that there's this metaphysical, supernatural harmony that's everywhere. But the only reason we don't see it is because we're too caught up in the chaos of the everyday world. We go past that. This is what Kandinsky does. He's looking past the chaos of the everyday world. And instead of seeing trees and horses and a tower by a river, starts off with, he ends up seeing lines and colors and shapes. And those reflect for him the opposite idea of the universal. It's past the physical to get to the supernatural. This is, like I said, a lot to get your head with this. But if you think about it, right, how can a painting get you and Bill, your vice or vice? The end of those. Right? How can a painting get you to think about spiritual matters? It all it shows you is the world around you. That's kind of a good question, right? How can a painting that reminds you of this world get you to think about that world? Well, that's a question. find them in the Bible. It talks about images, it talks about carved images. That's real people. You know? It's very, very visible. But how did any work of art that simply reminds us of where we live and how we experience, how did that ever get us to escape from that? That's kind of the question on it, right? So, theosophy said basically that it is exactly that problem. The inability of most of us to look at the world around us and understand it because we get caught up in what we see. And that's what's keeping us from that idea of peace. So Kandinsky wants to get past it as well, because he buys into this. He's using painting as a way. So if we look at both of these works, the idea of theosophy, what we can see in each of them is that he's really increasingly less representation behind, right? It was there to begin with, but he's moved away from it. And we saw with the right where that came out in some earlier pictures of men on horseback charging into battle, and metaphors for resurrection and you know, the spiritual life of man. The one on the left is called, in parentheses, right, complete pilot improvisation 31, sea battle, right, naval battle. And once you hear that, it becomes pretty obvious, doesn't it? You start seeing maps of the ships, and you start to see the guns coming out the side, and you start to read some of those squiggly circles that appear around the sun on the right. You start to see them like explosions or water splashing, right? It's a naval battle. And for Kandinsky, this is two things, right? Again, it's the idea of the struggle. To move past the physical to supernatural, right? Just that crusading knight. On the other hand, both of these pictures, what better way to show the chaos of the world than to show battle? Utter chaos, right? And to use that world at its most chaotic as a way to try to focus on how to find harmony is perfect, isn't it? I mean, it's still like with peonies and tulips and whatnot. That's already kind of great. You don't need a lot of help to look at that and think about different things. Naval battle, wow, right? You really got to go somewhere with that to push past it and think, where's the peace and harmony here? And that's what Kandinsky wants to get you to do. But look past the here and the now. Look past the chaos and the clutter. This is a good message for leading up to testing, isn't it? Look past the clutter and the chaos and think about where the harmony can lie. Right? Find that zone. Now, the last artist we'll look at today, we're moving away from Germany now to Holland. Piet Mondrian. He's also a theosophist, right? He also believes in this idea that Kandinsky does, that behind the appearance of things is a universal harmony. That's the key element of theosophy. Universal harmony is behind the chaos of things, right? And for Mondrian, very different from Kandinsky, what he finds is a world where art is reduced to its most basic elements. Horizontal and vertical lines, no diagonals. Lines invariably in black, separating off sections that are painted in the primary colors, plus black and white. It's the zero-sum game, right? It is reduced to its barest minimum, right? That it could possibly be. And his idea is that this represents the harmony that's behind the surface of things. Absolutely no representation whatsoever. No relationship here. You're not going to see a vase sitting on a table or a sea battle or anything like that. It is just the grid, the harmony of the theosophists. Who'd have thought that 10 years earlier, 15 years earlier, you could paint like this? Right? It's up in the Krieger collection, up on Foxhall Road. Right? He started off doing these sort of realist pictures of the Dutch countryside. Because he's from Holland, so, nice windmill, people working, and a man rowing a boat was kind of like Rembrandt's windmill from, 300 years earlier, 250 years earlier. And certainly this is, where he starts off. He's looking out and trying to find these peaceful landscapes, these harmonies. But he then begins to investigate painting per se. And he starts to set up still lifes, look at landscapes, and begins to look at them in different directions, different ways. He starts to see, for example, look down in here, disembodied horizontals and verticals that are suggested by the edge of the table, by elements within the composition. If you look at the blue ginger pot, this is how people used to store ginger, right? You can see that he sort of abstracts that ginger pot to emphasize these horizontal and vertical lines, and then the things behind it, stacked up behind it also. He's beginning to find within the composition these structural elements, horizontals and verticals over on the right-hand corner, the same thing, where each one of them is now beginning to sort of fragment into this lattice of harmony that's behind the surface of things, right? These were done in the same year, right? And you can see he's pushing it. He's looking for those relationships and how he can find them. And what he has to do eventually is to figure out how to get past what he sees and get only to the harmony, right? So he begins to take what he's looking at and reduce it through repeated studies into these forms of this simple grid of horizontals and verticals that he sees as being this harmony behind things. Right? Looking out at a pier in the ocean, instead of seeing the pier, which is this bit down here, right, moving off into space, and the waves of the ocean behind, what he ends up seeing instead is a series of bisecting horizontal and vertical lines. I'm not saying he sees it, that's what he focuses on, right? And what he's doing is he's finding it behind the surface of things. It's this perfect harmony through a balance of horizontals and verticals. Once he gets it, around 1920, he never gives it up, right? He works it again and again and again. And he calls this movement, and I forgot to put it up on the slide. He calls what he's doing the style, S-T-I-J-L, which in Dutch means the style. The style. And what he means by this is that there isn't anything else. Right? He's reduced it to bare minimum. Horizontal verticals in the three primary colors. Green, purple, oranges, right? Red, yellow, black and white. Horizontal, vertical, nothing else. And by reducing it to this, he says basically that this is it. This is the style. Right? And that's what he goes to. The other artists working alongside of him in Holland, right? Not as good as he is. Here's what he's doing here. But it's not as easy as it looks, right? When you get to the point where you've gotten rid of everything, oh man, that's tough. Because you've got to figure out the proportion of that red to the blue. And the red maybe might be off by a bit in so far as double red you might use it. It's about figuring out how these things strike you. You want that to be a perfect square or just off by a bit. How thin are your black lines in? You got to figure that all out. That's all you've got anymore, right? You kind of rely on the fact that it looks like a cow or a windmill, right? And therefore it's kind of pleasant. You've got to figure out how to make you interested in less easy, less. And this is it, right? So everything is meticulously throughout. And he's worked on the balance of the different compositions. You can see, especially the ones for the Phillips collection, because I got a better picture than the textbook picture. That even the whites are not the same color. You see that? Each of the white squares is a slightly different tone of white. And none of them are really white, right? They're mostly off-white. And he's working it out with great meticulousness. You also notice that oftentimes this grid doesn't yellow behind him. Right? Everything is thought out as tightly and thoroughly as it can possibly be. And part of that is why it's kind of a dangerous thing. To pull that off, to make it still something that you want to do. And for Mondrian, what it is, the reason it's in here is he wants to discover that peace and harmony that lays in the surface. And so for him, painting is a form of meditation. It's the thing that gets him past the chaos of the world. I used to be an artist, right? I used to be an art class. And when you get in the studio, isn't that a release in a way? Right? You're getting past it. And so you're letting him take an image in a picture. Getting in there with his brush and doing it as tightly as he can. There's a form of escaping into this world. So for Mondrian, as he writes about these, this lattice work continues everywhere behind the visible world. This is the harmony that Theosophy writes about. And even if you turn the canvas on an angle, what it's revealing is the harmony behind, so that the lines don't follow the edges of the canvas. Right? It's experimenting with that idea. I have no idea what I was going to say about that, so I'm going to skip past it. Because we're almost out of time. As I was just saying, right, you have to be really careful with what's left. Look closely at this, and you'll notice that the lines vary, the black lines vary in width. So it's thinner here than it is there. Right? It doesn't tell you, it's really soft and through. In fact, you'll notice that you pay attention even to the break between the different lines. Everything, it could be very easy to paint this. And yet it's made it. It's very easy to roll it on, right? It's going to roll it or just get toned in. That's not, notice that the blue, all of the strokes are horizontal. Right? Coming across. And then he signs it in front in the primary color as well against that, right? Up above, the paint on the stripes is painted differently. It's very, very easy to come back through design. And the white that you see here is the same way. And he's paying particularly close attention to where things come together. And he's really aware of those edges, because that's what he's left with. Here's the white upper left, right, we're right in here. And you can see the whites, they could be easily just rolled on. Again, everything is done back through, and he's working it up. And you have to imagine that as he's painting it, he's immersing himself in this idea that there's a harmony waiting for us if we could just look past the chaos of our world. Not everything has horizontal strokes, right? So for the corner, the red is all painted this direction. This coming across here. And again, the black, the lines, changing the portion of it. And I don't know if he's measured, right? Yeah. Golden section. Right? He's intuitive as he's working with that. And by doing that, he's immersing himself in something that has nothing to do with it. It has only to do with it. And that, I think, is the great thing about this. This art can allow us this opportunity to immerse ourselves in something that is in the world around us. Okay, that's 6:15. I have my very last slide, which is rare. Okay, we have a little bit to talk about, the most difficult, because this is art. This wait till Thursday. One last thing. I've got only 4 people in class that I know for sure have an exam overlap. Have you emailed me yours? You did. Okay, very good. Can I get a show of hands of people who have an exam overlap with our exam? I've asked you 3 or 4 times to look into this, right? Quinn, I've got you. I need to send your name. Yeah, I got you. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Cesar, you said you were okay. Somebody else told me they couldn't. I added 5th person, I think. But Andrea, I'll be sure to add your name to the list. What you guys need to do, I need you to listen up for just a second. Sorry for the if you have to get overlap, I'm going to email you the name of the person that you need to. The person that you need to email to take the negative. They'll be proctoring it over in the registrar box. Right? And so you need to make an appointment with them to take it at your convenience during testing. Whatever day works out. Right? As long as it's before 5 o'clock. Okay? So if you're in that boat. Finally, I'm banging through the worksheets and I'm emailing them back to you slowly but surely. And there's still, I think I've got 6 more left to go. So I've rated through, I think, Baroque Holland. Right? So I'm still accepting things after that if you want to get this to me ASAP. Okay? That's it. Sorry, we're 2 minutes like this.